Rightio, and good morning, class. It's our last day together. How sad. I hope you've enjoyed our journey as much as I have, but I do have to be getting back to the colonies to make sure everything is in place. But before I leave, today we will read Chapter 9, Rip Van Winkle, and it's another story adapted by Washington Irving. The question today is, how does Washington Irving weave fact and fiction together in the telling of Rip Van Winkle? Sit back, relax, and enjoy. In a village in the Catskill Mountains, there lived a simple, good-natured fellow by the name of Rip Van Winkle. He was a kind neighbor, and the children would shout with joy whenever he approached. Rip Van Winkle was a lovable soul who was ready to attend to anybody's business but his own. As to keeping his own farm in order, he found it impossible, and his children were as ragged as if they belonged to nobody. Rip was one of those happy fools who lived without a care, ate white bread or brown, whichever required less thought or trouble, and preferred to starve on a penny than work for a pound. If left to himself, he would have whistled his life away in perfect contentment, but his wife was continually complaining about his laziness and the ruin he was bringing up his family. Rip would shrug his shoulders, shake his head, cast up his eyes, but say nothing. This always provoked a fresh attack from his wife, so he frequently left the house to go outside. Rip used to console himself when driven from home with the company of a group of other men who met on a bench in front of an inn. Sitting beneath the portrait of His Majesty King George III, they talked over village gossip and told stories. If by chance an old newspaper fell into their hands, they would listen as Van Bummel, the schoolmaster, read aloud its contents. All kinds of discussions followed the reading of the newspaper. Nicholas Vedder, a respected elder member of the village, made his opinions known by the manner in which he smoked his pipe. Short puffs indicated anger. When he was pleased, he inhaled the smoke slowly and expelled it in the light, delicate clouds. One day, seeking to escape the hard work of the farm and the complaints of his wife, Rip grabbed his gun and walked into the Catskill Mountains to hunt for squirrels. All day, the mountains echoed with the sounds of shots fired from his gun. Finally, he sat down on a little green hill that looked down into the valley below. Rip admired the scene as evening gradually advanced and sighed as he thought about the journey home. As he was about to descend, he heard a voice calling, "Rip Van Winkle! Rip Van Winkle!" He caught sight of a strange figure climbing up the rocks, carrying something on its back. Rip was surprised to see any human being in this lonely place, but he concluded that it must be one of his neighbors in need of assistance. Rip hurried down to help. The stranger was a short old fellow with a grizzled beard. His clothes were old-fashioned, and he carried a stout keg that Rip supposed was full of something refreshing to drink. He made signs for Rip to assist him, and together they clambered up a narrow gully. Every now and then, along rolling peals like thunder seemed to issue out a deep ravine. Passing through this ravine, they came to a hollow. In the center was a company of odd-looking persons playing at ninepins. The thunderous noise Rip had heard from afar was the sound of a ball rolling toward the pins. Like Rip's guide, they were dressed in an outlandish fashion in enormous breeches. What seemed particularly odd to Rip was these fellows looked very serious indeed. They played without speaking and were, in fact, the most melancholy party he had ever witnessed. They stared at Rip in such a way that his heart turned within him and his knees banged together. Rip and his guide joined the party. His guide emptied the keg into large tankards, and the men sipped in silence. When they were done, they returned to their game. As Rip's fear subsided, he ventured to taste the beverages, too. Before long, the event of the day in the mountain air overpowered Rip, and he fell into a deep sleep. Upon waking, Rip found himself on the green hill where he had first seen the old man. It was a bright, sunny morning. Surely, thought Rip, I have not slept here all night. He recalled the strange men. Oh, what excuse shall I make to Dame Van Winkle? He looked around for his gun, but found only an old rusty firearm. Suspecting that he had been robbed, he decided to find the old-fashioned men and demand his gun. As he rode to walk, he found himself stiff in the joints. With some difficulty, he found the gully up which he and his companion had ascended, but he could find no traces of the ravine that had led to the area with the odd little man playing nine pipes. He shouldered the rusty firearm and with a heart full of trouble turned his steps homeward. As he approached the village, he met a number of people, but none whom he knew. This surprised him, for he thought he was acquainted with every one of his neighbors. Their dress, too, of a different fashion. They all stared at him with surprise and strokes of their chins. When Rip did the same, he found to his astonishment that his beard had grown a foot long. A troop of children ran at his heels, hooting after him and pointing at his gray beard. There were houses in the village that he had never seen before, with unfamiliar names over the doors. He began to wonder whether both he and the world around him were bewitched. With some difficulty, he found his own house. The roof had fallen in and the door was off its hinges. He entered and called for his wife and children, but all was silent. He spotted a dog that looked like his own and called out to him, but the dog snarled and showed his teeth. "My own dog has forgotten me," sighed poor Rip. He hurried to the village inn. Before it now hung a flag with stars and stripes. He spotted the face of King George on the sign, but now his red coat was blue. His head wore a cocked hat, and underneath the figure was printed General Washington. There was a crowd of people around the door, but none that Rip knew. He inquired, "Where's Nicholas Vedder?" There was a silence. Then 8 old men replied, "Nicholas Vedder? Why, he is dead and gone these 18 years. "Where's Van Bummel, the schoolmaster?" asked Rip. "He went off to the wars and is now in Congress," the old man answered. Rip's heart sank at hearing these sad changes. "I'm not myself," he said sadly. "I was myself last night, but I fell asleep. Now everything has changed, and I can't tell who I am." The bystanders looked at each other in puzzlement. Then a young woman pressed through the throng. She had a child in her arms, which, frightened by the gray-bearded man's looks, began to cry. "Hush, Rip," she murmured. "The old man won't hurt you." The name of the child and the air of the mother awakened long-ago memories in Rip's mind. He caught the mother in his arms and said, "I am your father, young Rip Van Winkle, once." "Old Rip Van Winkle now. Does nobody know poor Rip Van Winkle?" All stood amazed for a while. Then an old woman exclaimed, "Sure enough, it is Rip Van Winkle. Welcome home again, old neighbor. Why, where have you been these 20 years?" Rip's story was soon told, for the whole 20 years had been to him but one night. Many were skeptical, but an old man who was well versed in the logical traditions confirmed his story in his most satisfactory manner. He assured the company that the Catskills Mountains had always been haunted by strange beings, and that his own father had once seen these odd little men playing ninepipes in the hollow of a mountain. Rip's daughter took him home to live with her. Her mother had died some years before. Having arrived at that happy age when a man can retire and rest, Rip took his place once more on the bench at the inn and was revered as one of the wise old men of the village. He used to tell his story to every stranger that arrived. Some doubted the truth of it, but the old villagers gave Rip full credit. Even to this day, when a thunderstorm blows in, they say that the old little men are at their game of ninepins, and it is common wish of all hen-pecked husbands in the neighborhood, when life hangs heavy on their hands, that they might take themselves up into the Catskill Mountains in search of some adventure. Well, friends, that is it for me for this unit. I've really enjoyed sharing my story with you and meeting all of you. I hope that you have a great summer, and I hope to see you again one day. Bye-bye.